How often have you seen a situation like this with two kids fighting over something? Each child is pursuing his or her own self-interest, each telling themselves a different narrative about who is right. And then a conflict like this, even in adults, can remain unresolved. But conflict can be reframed from shifting identity from an individual perspective and the values that are associated to a shared perspective with new values. And this kind of conflict resolution strategy is actually really common in life. How often we use expressions like, we're all on the same team, we're all on the same side, we're all in the same boat, we're all in this together. So while we instinctively use this conflict resolution strategy all the time in everyday life, we often do not intentionally use it in interpretation. Now, interpretation has become really good at representing narrative plurality, that is, using and including multiple perspectives. But inclusion, narrative inclusion, at the same order of organization can also produce identity hardening, power competition, and unresolved tension. I mean, if that weren't true, we probably wouldn't be here having this symposium at this time. So horizontal plurality multiplies voices, but doesn't necessarily change the frame of reference we need to end conflict. So a real example of modernist development, this takes place at a climate march in New York City, shows how modern development conflicts with indigenous rights. And this image tells a conflictive story of two perspectives, at least in horizontal fashion. Now, I've mentioned horizontal twice, so what does horizontal storytelling really mean? Well, horizontal storytelling occurs when different narratives emerge from the same common social space in which those narratives may be interpreting differently, applying different values and history, and oftentimes in opposition. Vertical storytelling, on the other hand, shifts the narrative up or down to a different order or level of organized reality. It expands identity. It expands our sense of belonging, sharing, and perspective. And as you can see in this image here, most of our narratives live here at the level of cultural narratives or worldviews. But this is definitely not the only level that we can tell our stories from. For example, we can also tell stories from the cosmic level. We can tell it from a planetary level, from the level of all of nature, from the human species level, from human societies within our species, from cultural narratives and worldviews within our societies, from the perspective of individual people or other organisms, from the cells that make up individuals, from the molecules that make up cells, and of course, the atoms that make up molecules. Now, this spectrum might remind some of you of the Middle Ages concept of the chain of being, which is a spectrum of reality from rocks all the way up through God and everything in between. But what you're looking at here on this screen, it is not religious. It's not metaphysical. It's rooted in systems thinking and nested organizational complexity. And this isn't a spectrum of scale or superiority. Rather, it's about shifting the sense of belonging, identity, up or down one or more levels. I mean, after all, we are all part of the same cosmos, and we are all made up of the same atoms. And there's a lot of ways you could take this spectrum and divide it up into different pieces and give it different names. But drawing it right, that's not the point. The point is shifting perspective up or down so that we can reframe or even resolve conflicts among our narratives. I mean, this spectrum shows that we share all the way up and we share all the way down. But sometimes we have to shift our perspective vertically to appreciate what we share and hold in common. So let's use a real example to see how this might work. Taking the Starry Most Bridge seen here, built by 16th century Ottomans to connect two sides of the city of Mostar over the Neretva River in Bosnia and Herzegovina. At first, it's a symbol of unity for 4 centuries until the Bosnian War, when it was destroyed in 1993 through intense fighting between the Croats, which were Slavic Christians on the east side, and Bosniaks, which were Slavic Muslims on the west side of Mostar. Now, the two sides weren't just divided by religion, they were also divided by nationality and political allegiance. The bridge became a global symbol of cultural devastation when it was destroyed. Although, fortunately, after the war, UNESCO, the World Bank, and local entities rebuilt it, changing the symbol once again. But the point is, at the human cultural level, diversity feels vast and often very divisive. We have conflicts over everything, over ethnicity and religion and migration and politics and even sports. Humans are indeed extremely diverse, phenotypically and behaviorally. But if we shift one level up to the human species, the species level, suddenly that diversity shrinks away because we share 99.9% of our DNA with all other humans on the planet, including Croats and Bosniaks. We're extremely similar and unified genetically compared to other species on Earth. And even though our identity differences oftentimes feel vast in lived experience, we are all rooted in deep biological commonality. But let's not stop there. Let's shift up again, this time to the level of nature, to biodiversity. Now we have a context and sense of sharing which widens from one species to millions of species with incredible diversity. We share identity with all forms of life, including Croats and Bosniaks. But we don't have to stop at this level either. Let's go up again. This time we shift up to a planetary identity, a new perspective, replacing a national level or a species level identity. We see Earth as a single system or being of which we are all part. We all depend on this small blue marble against the frigidity of deep space. It's a shared belonging. It's a human decentering. Now, you may have heard the story of astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who on Apollo 14, after having walked on the moon, on his way back to Earth, looked out the window at Earth and experienced an epiphany. And one of the famous things that he said was, you develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck and drag him 250,000 miles to the moon and say, look at that, you son of a bitch. That is indeed an astronomical shift from national to planetary. But again, why should we stop here? Let's upshift one more time. This time we shift up to the galaxy or the universe, where our Earth is one of trillions of planets. And that replaces a planetary identity. It increases our shared sense of place for the galaxy, like it did in Star Wars or Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. Our cultural level of identity, it's still there. We're not pretending it went away, but now it's cast into a much larger context of diversity. And in fact, from here, we're not even sure how much farther we can upshift. So instead, now that's actually a conversation for another talk, but let's downshift instead. So we can downshift from our cultural narratives and cast light on our shared grounding. I mean, after all, we're all made of the same atoms and molecules and minerals which have existed in geological time, deep time, a deep enough time that it dissolves human timescales and decenters our sense of time. Human history is, after all, but a quick blip in geological history. And it's humbling as it highlights the fragility of our narratives and even the fragility of our species in the face of multiple mass extinctions across hundreds of millions of years. Awareness of these differences in timescales can soften our conflicts. What before might have seemed like a long-standing conflict can now be seen as super recent, even fleeting. But when we downshift, it's not just about geological time. We can also downshift and recognize shared agency and the value of the foundational systems that sustain human life. For example, when we ascribe equal rights or legal personhood to rivers, as has been done in New Zealand, Colombia, and in the United States, we see that agency and moral consideration are not just human. It's a shift from human-centered morality to multi-species or ecological morality. It broadens moral consideration. So whether we upshift or downshift, we discover new levels of shared participation that could bring us together more than bring us apart. Now, having said all this, there are still limits, or even walls, you might say, to vertical storytelling. Vertical storytelling does not automatically stabilize new sense of sharing or reframe conflict. Resistance can occur because for some people, shifting vertically can threaten their entrenched narratives, redistribute power, or challenge their moral certainty. Just consider attempts to upshift from the Jewish trauma of the Holocaust to universal lessons of cruelty, genocide, and human rights. Now, the expression never again was originally designed for Jewish people. But now there are many progressives who take never again and want to apply it to anyone and everyone. Now, while this may be motivational for wider populations, a shift from group-specific memory to species-level morality, that can offend people. It can dilute historical narratives, erase victim identity, overshadow particular ideological differences, and really minimize the suffering of Holocaust survivors and that of their families. The same you can also see happening when there's an upshifting from national identity to European integration identity, which is still happening today. So vertical storytelling does not resolve conflict. It connects opposing sides with new levels of sharing or commonality that may mitigate conflict. Now, interpretation has always been about widening awareness and making new connections. So vertical storytelling is really just a way to intentionally do that. And consider these examples. An exhibit hall reframes human migration with ecological cycles. Guided walk shifts human land ownership stories to watershed dynamics. Interpreters in a cemetery start with individual biographies and end talking about human history. So when narratives feel locked in opposition, ask yourself, at what level of organization is the story being told? And what would happen if we upshift it or downshift it one level? That could be a very practical tool. So interpretation often plays the role of the adult in the room. It doesn't decide who is right, but it expands the frame of sharing in which disagreement occurs. So we might even say that horizontal storytelling multiplies voices, while vertical storytelling multiplies sharing.